What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MI Gardener channel. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how your soil could potentially become dirt. Now, the difference between soil and dirt is a very contentious issue because a lot of people think that dirt is soil. And true, soil can be dirt, but dirt is not soil. It gets a little confusing, but just remember this. The difference between soil and dirt is they both are made up of sand, silt, and clay. However, soil is made up of sand, silt, and clay, plus organic matter, bacteria, and fungi. It's the presence of these microbes that actually make them, that actually makes it alive. You see, having fertility in your soil is what makes soil soil rather than dirt. And so in this episode, I'm going to talk about how your soil could be potentially becoming dirt based on you not taking care of it. Now, I'm also going to outline some ways for you to turn your dead dirt into soil again. And it's really by adding organic matter. That's something that is often void in a lot of soils that have become depleted over time. You see, when you have this garden soil here in our raised beds, you notice a few things. Now you notice, and I'll bring you guys in close, we'll really outline the differences, but you'll notice in our soil that they are fluffy. You'll notice that because they're rich in organic matter. The fluffiness is derived from having things like, it might be sphagnum peat moss. That could be your organic matter source. But in a garden, that can be kind of costly. It's very, very costly to add just sphagnum peat moss to your garden. And on top of that, you're going to use a lot of it. And it's not the most, it's not the most environmentally friendly product out there. And so our organic matter in our raised beds comes from the form of compost. We have a big compost pile, and every single year we add compost to our raised beds. That will do quite a few things, but the first thing that it does is it adds the organic matter. The organic matter is, like I said, the fluffiness in the soil, because having fluff allows for air, and it allows for water penetration, and it allows for nutrient holding capabilities. That adds all the fertility that you need. Nutrient holding capabilities gives it fertility. Aeration gives oxygen to the beneficial bacteria and fungi, which we'll talk about later. That comes from the compost as well. But also, it gives it the water penetration, which allows the water to move throughout the soil, because beneficial bacteria and fungi are living, just like you and I, and they need water as well. And so water plus nutrients plus air means life. And so you get a lot of that from, well, you get all of that from organic matter, things like compost. Things like broken down manures would be great. Mulches, wood chip mulch is another great form of organic matter. It just takes longer to break down. So depending on how you garden, you can actually get organic matter from a variety of different ways. The other thing you'll notice with our soil is that if you were to grab it and smell it, I cannot express to you just how amazing it smells. And the reason why it smells so good is because of the fact that there's that oxygen-rich environment. If you have a sealed container of, say, water, and you leave that water just in a dingy, dark spot of your house, pull it out a year later and give that a whiff. Tell me what it smells like. Anything that is void of oxygen in an oxygen-void environment goes anaerobic. Anaerobic is kind of swampy. It smells murky, musty. It's very, it just smells very stagnant. But in rich soil that has lots of oxygen, has lots of life, lots of aerobic activity, it smells very fresh. It smells very, almost like a spring rain mixed with a forest floor. It's just an absolutely incredible smell. And that's derived from just the activity of the bacteria. It keeps things mobile so that they don't smell like a swamp. That's why swamps have lots of, there's lots of stagnant smells, because most of those stagnant smells come from things like methane buildup. Methane buildup happens in a low oxygen environment where there's not a lot of movement, and there's basically rotting material that still is breaking down, but it's not actually working. There's no oxygen there. It's still just breaking down and basically compressing down and becoming this big sludge mess and whatnot. And that's a lot of times why when you have water sitting in puddles in your yard that might be a lot of clay or might be dead and really don't absorb water very well, those areas tend to smell more like a swamp. And that's because of the fact that the water just kind of sits there. Everything kind of just decays and nothing moves. There's not a lot of water movement. And so that's another thing to notice about our soil compared to dirt is the smell. Another thing that's different about our soil compared to dirt is the texture. Now the texture comes along with the smell and with the feel, but when it's fluffy, that fluffy texture, the texture is very light. So we're talking about the density. The texture it feels squishy. It kind of feels like a pillow, and that's because of all that trapped air. And so soil that is rich, true living, breathing soil is fluffy. It should have a soft, spongy texture to it because that means that it's trapping air. The other thing that it has in terms of texture is it's got the density. It's got light material, and that's because organic matter is very light. As organic matter breaks down, it loses the air. It starts to compress. It starts to actually degrade. And organic matter needs to be, you need to replace that organic matter once at the very minimum, upwards of 2 times a year, because that organic matter does break down. That's why our raised beds, as you'll notice, throughout the growing season, begin to sink. It's not because I've referred to it in the past as kind of a magic soil fairy. The magic soil fairy does not wave her wand over the bed and then just take soil with her. It just does not just magically disappear. It compresses over time as it breaks down in a process called weathering. And so that weathering is what kind of breaks down the material, makes it less fluffy over time. And so that can change the texture and the density over time as well. Soil, or dirt, I should say, dirt is void of all organic matter, and so it's very dense. It compacts because it's so dense. There's no air. It's a lot of sand. It's a lot of silt. It's a lot of clay. And those things do not have a very large particle size. The particle size, the larger the particle size, comes from the larger bits of organic matter. Bits of wood chips, or it could be grass clippings. It could be mulched up leaves. Heck, it could even be food waste. But those particles are what give it that kind of spongy, beautiful texture. And that spongy, beautiful texture comes from the humus, or the organic matter. And so those are the different things that are in my soil that you'll notice are different from my soil versus just a dead patch in someone's yard. And so now with that being said, I want to tell you kind of how you could potentially be killing your soil. Now, like I said, the difference between soil and dirt is the presence of life. And so one way that you could be killing the life in your soil is by not regularly re-amending your soil. Like I said, compost is the source of bacteria, fungi. It's the source of organic matter. And if you're not regularly reapplying that to your soil, as I said, over time, your soil has a tendency to degrade. It has a tendency to break down and weather, which is natural. That naturally happens. Even in the forest, that happens. But the difference is that every year the forest regenerates by dropping more leaves. And so if you're not regularly regenerating your soil, it can become depleted. And so this beautiful layer of organic matter was just added from our compost pile. But if we didn't have that, over time what would happen is that would begin to break down more and more and more. Before long, you'd have a very compacted layer, even though we started with beautiful, rich organic matter. We started with all compost. Another thing that you can do to kill off the soil is by using harmful synthetic fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers are different from organic fertilizers because they contain salts. Now, not salt like your table salt, but salts are a combination of minerals that, chemicals that are put together that are more plant available, but they can actually, the residue can build up in your soil. If you've ever used synthetic fertilizers in a house plant, and you notice the houseplant has like these little white crystals around the base or around the top of the soil. That's caused from salt buildup. And that buildup actually stays in your soil. It does not flush from your soil. It stays in there. And it can actually bind up nutrients. It can bind up oxygen. It can bind up and actually kill soil life. And it can push away bacteria and fungi out of your soil because of the fact that it is, it's kind of a residue in your soil. and that can actually over time kill your soil. That's why a lot of farmers turn to what they call fertilizer dependency, because they regularly have to re-amend fertilizer to fix the fact that they don't have any life in their soil. Now, another way that you can be killing your soil and turning it into dirt is by using a very aggressive approach to tilling your garden. Now, rototilling does a couple things. Rototilling, I've said, is not a bad thing to get a garden started. But if you make a practice of regularly doing it, even when it's not needed, that can be causing more harm than good. And the reason why is because the beautiful soil structure that you've made here with organic matter. Organic matter has a structure, and if you disturb that structure and flip it around and jostle it all around, the bacteria and fungi, they basically get exposed to sunlight. If the soil here is nice and settled, and I come in here and I rototill it, basically turning the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom, I've flipped it. And what that does is it actually exposes the top of the soil to the sun. It exposes the soil to harsh conditions that it's not used to and that it's not sustainable to live in, and so that ends up killing it off. Also, what it does is it turns the soil so that your structure, it has a tendency to filter based on particle size. So the smaller particles are on top and the larger particles are down below. But if you flip it, what you've done is you now have the bigger particles on top and the smaller particles down below, and that can lead to compaction. You might think that your soil is nice and fluffy initially, but over time it compacts very quickly. And again, we talked about the compaction means that you're losing oxygen. And so by regularly compacting your soil again and again and again, without having that organic matter there to act as that spongy, loose texture, you can actually begin to suffocate your soil, and that can actually kill off the soil bacteria and fungi, which makes soil rather than dirt. And then the final way that you can actually be killing off your soil is by not mulching your soil. Now, this is another thing that kind of comes with organic gardening, and we talk about covering your soil. Like a forest floor covers the soil with growth such as trees or shrubs or even grass. That covering protects the soil so that even the top layer of soil, which is the most important layer of the garden, does not get killed off. The sun, when it beats down on the soil in the summer, can actually cause what's called solarization. And solarization is where the solar radiation penetrates into the soil and can actually radiate and kill off that really important top 1 to 3 inches of soil. That top 1 to 3 inches of soil is where most of the life in your garden is found. And so you don't want to disturb that or radiate it with the sun. And so by covering your soil with a mulch layer, or by heavily planting plants, like in a dense planting, we call it high intensity gardening, but by not densely planting your bed or by covering it with a mulch, you are opening the soil up to any space, not only that, but also weeds. You're also opening that up to be basically radiated by the sun. And so the more cover you have, the better quality soil you're going to retain. All right, now what can you do if your soil does become depleted? It does die, it does become dirt. Just add organic material. As I've said, that is kind of the cure-all for fixing broken soil. If your soil has begun to die and does become kind of dirt, and it is just kind of sand, silt, and clay, there's nothing else there, what you can do is just add the organic matter, add the compost, whether that's through composted grass clippings, composted leaf mulch, whether that's through any form of compost whatsoever, composted manures. It could be, it could be worm compost, it could be vermicompost for all I care. Just adding compost is so important, because when you add the compost, you're going to add the organic matter, you're going to add the bacteria, and you're going to add the fungi. That is the only thing that differentiates soil from dirt. And then also the final thing is repetition. Once you have something that's working, repeating those steps, making it a regular routine, constantly adding the compost is what's going to save your soil. You don't have an established forest over top of your garden regularly dropping leaves. And so what I would say is that you have to be the forest, you have to be the trees regularly dropping organic matter on your garden, because it's just not sustainable otherwise. Your soil will begin to break down over time, and it does take work. But it's that little bit of work over time that can really save a ton of hassle in the long run. So would you rather add, a bucket of compost onto your garden beds once or twice a year? Or would you rather have to, come back every 3 or 4 years and completely overhaul your entire garden, spending hours of work rather than just minutes of work? Just think about that too. As always, this is Luke from the MI Gardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home, and we'll catch you all on the next episode. See you guys. Bye.